Now, working with somebody like Kathy Moran, was my editor at National Geographic, she has exactly the same way of reading images as I do. And it is the most intense thing to sit with somebody. It is beyond a sexual experience. But to sit with somebody and then go, it's this frame, then you go, yeah, yep. And then you go, it's that frame, and they go, yep, yep. Out of millions of pictures, you are suddenly speaking exactly the same language that no one else speaks. It's your language. No one else speaks it. But you're taking out everything that stops people speaking that language, and you're giving them one word, one frame, that frame, elephant story. That is an alphabet compressed into one single frame. You present that to an audience who does not have visual literacy, and they'll get it. Present it to one who does have visual literacy, and they'll get it on steroids. We now have a world in which people have visual literacy, but it's dumb. It's dumbed down because there's so much of it. So now you're trying to produce, or I want to produce, I am producing, hopefully, images that makes people do exactly what National Geographic says, is when you're going through it, they don't go, oh, they go, oh, hang on. That second look, and that second look that says, okay, let me read this. And then if you can write as well, and now I've lost all inhibition as far as writing is concerned. So now I write. So now not only is my work, my imagery coming straight out of my head and my soul, but so are my words. So now I'm just like, what am I going to do? I'm going to be polite. I'm going to be, I'm going to write in a way that I should write. It's all a diary now. So everything I do now, there are no limitations to what I do. So I just write. I document and I write. And I put it together in such a way that it means something to me. And now I believe that if it means something to me because it's so honed down, then I have a voice, that it can go out. So it would take me a long time to do things because it's important. So I have work that I've shot, work from here, from Saudi, that I shot a long time ago, that I will go back through and I'll look at, and I'll remember the situation, or I've taken notes about the situation, and I'll know the significance about the number of leopards that they've managed, the Arabian leopards that they've managed to breed here, to introduce. It's mind-numbing. It's brilliant. So to be able to understand how they're doing that and the backstory to that, and produce an image that has liquidized, compacted everything that's gone before into one single frame, because people don't have time to look at more than one single frame, unless you can get them to go, I want to know more. And that's the ultimate aim. But everything now is, I'm trying to liquidize into a single frame, the whole story, a single frame.
Welcome to the show, David.
Hi, Patrick.
I'm so glad to have you on today. I talked to Steve, the other producer on the show here, and the founder of Urbanaut, and you guys have had a long relationship. And we were talking a little bit before the show about how you two have been kind of watching each other's work, and he's a big fan of you. And so I'm really, really glad that you're on the show, and thank you for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for persisting. I'm sorry I've been a little bit unreliable and moving around, but it's super great to talk to you. And likewise, Steve speaks very highly of you. And yeah, I love what he does. I love his work, and I like the transition, if you like, of what he's done with his work. I think it's fantastic. So I'm very, very keen to be involved.
It's the nature of what it is that you do, and the life you have decided to have, and so it's really, I'm just glad to have you on the show today. So I'm glad we were able to line that up.
I like the way you describe it as decided to do. I'm not sure. I'm not sure there was ever a decision in it, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I guess it called you then.
I don't think it was ever a decision. I really don't.
I've heard that two ways. Whether it's a decision that someone does it, or it's like what it sounds like in your case, a vortex that kind of pulls you in and doesn't allow you to escape. But I think that's an interesting thing to think about. But before we dive in to our conversation, let's just dive into who you are for those that don't know you. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, sure. A documentary photographer. I work human-wildlife coexistence stories. I have worked on those stories now for probably, 20, 25 years, I guess. So I'm not a wildlife photographer, although I often get called a wildlife photographer. I wouldn't say I didn't have an interest in wildlife photography, because I do, but for me, it's always been the backstory. There are some extraordinary wildlife photographers around, and I'm sure we'll talk about the work that they do, but I've always been more interested in how the particular animal, particular species, the particular ecosystem survives and gets there in order for another to go and enjoy it. So I'm not really looking to produce a magnificent picture of an animal. I'm more looking to understand the relationship and the coexistence with that animal and us. We are increasingly moving into their landscapes, and I think how they deal with us and how we need to coexist with them is much more important for me.
Based off of what you're saying there, I get to thinking about this image that I saw on your webpage, and it's a lion, and there's this fire that's sitting right behind them, and it's encroaching on them, and he's kind of coexisting there with this.
I think we're sharing screen. Yeah, I do. We're sharing screens. You mean this image here?
No, I don't have it yet, but we'll jump into that here in a minute. We're just going to kind of go with the conversation for now, but I'm just kind of recalling images based off of, kind of my early research with you. But I was thinking about that image, and it really kind of resonated with me when I was listening to what you were saying. But before we jump into that, I'm kind of curious, how did you get into photography? Is it something you've always done? How did you discover it, and how did you make that your life?
I mean, I've been doing this for as long as I can remember. I think it all started from my father. Really, my father was a very keen photographer. My mother, professional window dresser, so there was a theatrical side, I think, to what she did. She was producing spaces that attracted people in to buy things. My father, mechanical engineer, lecturer in mechanical engineering, general engineering drawing, so very technical, very linear in what he did. He used to spend his off days building clocks and repairing clocks. So a very, very, very focused, very directional individual, I guess. And I think the combination of the two produces the type of photography that I do, really. It's very driven. I have to be driven. If you're talking about the lion the lion in front of the fire, then that's something that I've been thinking about for a long time and wanted to try and find where this happened and where this was likely to happen. So there's a direction to what I do that I think comes from him, and then once you get there, you dress something. I'm not suggesting that it's any of these images are dressed in any other way than a documentary photography, but National Geographic has always taught us that when you're producing imagery, you need to produce imagery that engages with people, doesn't turn them away. My subjects can be so traumatic that you don't want to produce an image that makes people cover their eyes and walk away. I don't want to see this. I want to produce images that makes people look and say, I don't want this to happen anymore, so how do I help? And that's much more the direction that I go with my work. But in order to do that, if I can produce a beautiful image that intrigues, then I'm opening the subject up to an entirely different audience. Huntress with Buck, which is the Taylor Wessing image, is for me is the perfect example of that. When I started to work on hunters, I very much wanted to. I knew it was a difficult subject, and I very much wanted to introduce those individuals to an audience that normally wouldn't be interested or wouldn't care about trophy hunting, or would really not want to go down a particular route with me to try and understand or try and make sense or question whether it was right or wrong. It was not a foregone conclusion for me. Most of the subjects I work on are explorations. So, I mean, I can go back to your question. So,
have you thought about those works at all?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go briefly back, and then you can tell me to stop if you want. I mean, going briefly back to how it all started was, my father, was a very keen photographer, and in those days, his photography was very structured. So it was very, he had a leather strap with all these little pouches, and it would be a light meter and a flash and a this and a that. And I was about 5 or 6, I guess, and we'd go on holidays, and he would line us all up as a family, and he'd measure the distance, put the tripod up, and click, and that would be the frame. We wouldn't really think much of it. And a couple of months later, the sofa would be pushed to one side in the living room, and the screen would be pulled out, and he'd put the screen up, and a little yellow box with the Kodaphones would be brought out that had just dropped through the door and into the carousel projector, plunk, and we would live through what we'd done on holiday. And that for me produced a diary. It wasn't necessarily something I looked forward to. I'm not saying I didn't look forward to it. It wasn't really a consideration for me. But it was definitely something, when I saw it, it took me back to those times. And it formed, in a lot of ways, it formed my memory of my childhood. I may not remember those terrible baggy hang-knitted swimming trunks that my grandmother gave me, but I remember them because I have a photograph of them, and I have a photograph of me in them, and I still have that archive. So I still have all of his photography in the little yellow boxes. There was a diary.
We have to see that photo. We have to.
Yeah, not at this interview, you don't. Well, so
fair enough.
I was also super keen on wildlife. I would spend a lot of time in the Natural History Museum. Again, as a family, we would watch Attenborough on a Sunday evening, then on BBC Wildlife. So we'd all gather around. We'd get brushed through our Sunday bath before school on Monday, and then 8 o'clock in the evening, we'd all sit as a family and we'd watch Attenborough. So there were all these things that were moving me towards where I am now. I obviously wasn't particularly aware of them at the time, but I was also a great collector. So wildlife, I used to breed butterflies, collect butterflies, and I think that probably got to about 10. And it suddenly struck me, probably through Attenborough, that a lot of what I was collecting, I was also killing. And it just didn't sit particularly well with me. And I don't know why. There's no deep thought process. But I suddenly thought, well, if I could do what my father did, which is take pictures, if I could document in some way, then I wouldn't need to do that. So I started to use his camera, and it was a Praktica MTL3. And I was very proud of his camera, and he lent it to me, and I started to photograph things as much as I possibly could. I couldn't have long lenses, so I couldn't do any of the stuff that I possibly thought I wanted to do at the time. But I started to document, and then I started to process the film. It was all black and white. Started to process the film next door to where we lived in a photo shop. It wasn't a chemist; it was a photo shop. And then I noticed that when I was processing next door was the local newspaper, and it was just a local newspaper. So I started to go into the local newspaper and take the odd picture in. And again, I was probably about 11 or 12, and they were polite, and I think probably intrigued and critical about what I did. And it became very obvious to me that I needed to have more confidence in order to do what I was doing. If I was going to do this type of work, and it wasn't really at that stage this type of work. It was just if I was going to produce images that I felt had some sort of strength to them, then I would have to have a dialogue with people. And I wasn't great at talking to people. And so I thought, well, if I wanted to do a combination of natural history, wildlife, and photography and people, where's the best place to go? And where I was at the time was in Birmingham, in the UK. And there's a fantastic market there that used to sell fish and meat. And it's full of market traders. So they had everything. They had ducks, they had geese, they had fish, and they had very, very loud, very, very brash market traders. And so I would go there. I started to go there on a Saturday morning on my own, get the bus, and I would go there. And I'd photograph the market traders holding up their fish, holding chickens by the neck, all this type of stuff. And they would engage this young person who was taking these pictures. They were great. I'd go and process them. And then the following week, I would go back and I would show them the pictures. And what they started to do was to buy the pictures from me, to offer to buy the pictures from me. So I started to then have perpetual motion of photography, and that somebody was paying me to do what I wanted to do. And so therefore it allowed me to go back and to expand what I was doing. Still continued to go to the newspaper. And the local newspaper eventually saw what I was doing, started to publish some of the images. And they also then commissioned me. And I was still only probably about 12, 13 years old. And they started commissioning me to go and do
12?
12 or 13 years old, I would be probably at the time.
That just blows my mind. Like, you were very young to be doing that, to have that kind of presence, you know?
But it wasn't, you know, I don't think it was a presence, Patrick. I think it was probably a bit more of an escapism. I think it was a bit more so? I do. I think it gave me something to do, and it gave me access. This all sounds very deep because there's thought gone into it. At the time, none of this was of any relevance whatsoever. But I think in hindsight, it gave me access to do things that I would never have ever been able to justify in any other way. You know, why am I going to go to Africa? Why am I going to go and do, and this will take us to hunting. You know, a lot of hunters do what they do because the experience is something that they have no other way to get to that particular landscape and push themselves to that degree. Well, photography, in many instances, allows you to explore actually who you are to such a fine and focused degree that I think this was the route that I was going down. I don't know. But the newspaper started commissioning.
They were critiquing your work, and they were giving you pointers. 100%. They were giving you like little tips and tricks, and that's a 100%. Great education. But it was self-initiated, right?
It was self-initiated, possibly out of boredom, possibly out of the fact that I also, I think, as I said in the beginning, have a sort of a slight Rottweiler tendency that, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this well, and how do I do that? And nothing's going to stand in my way, which I think is an important characteristic if you do the type of photography I do. And a lot of us do have that same drive.
Right.
I think. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I'll cut this relatively short, but so, you know, they commissioned me. I started to shoot things like local fire station open days. I was a little bit of a novelty to be doing that at this age. So those people I was photographing were very engaged. I most definitely had a different response. And so therefore my imagery was different because of my age and because of what I was doing. So I think it was interesting, the newspaper. I had several conversations with my father at the time about all this. And I carried on doing it until I was about 16, 17. My father was particularly adamant about the fact that if I was going to do photography, I needed to have something to support my photography because you can never make a living out of photography. Too many people wanted, this is his words, too many people wanted to be photographers. So the possibility of you achieving that is almost non-existent. So therefore, you have to do something else. So therefore, you should find a career. We discussed me staying on to do, higher education. I didn't. I joined a bank as a foreign exchange dealer when I was about 16 or 17. I lasted about 3 months. I had an appraisal, never forget it. And the manager in the bank took me into his office and he said, David, we have no idea why you're here. And he said, and what's more interesting to me, I don't think you have any idea why you're here either. So I suggest you let me here. And I left, literally walked out, got the photographs that I'd been using over the years, photographing over the years, put them into a portfolio, and went to an art college in Kent in London. Had an interview I don't even know whether they had a place, to be honest, but it was very late to be interviewed. I think most people had got places by that time. Presented my portfolio, and the lecturer said sort of similar enlightening stuff, and basically said, your work is below average. I can't think of a reason why I would want to give you a place, other than you're clearly giving up a fantastic career in foreign exchange dealing in order to be a photographer. And I think you will probably be a success because of that. And most of the people who are photographers on this course will probably only ever be photography, amateur hobby photographers. Therefore, I'm going to give you a place. So he gave me a place.
Wow. So he had the presence of mind to kind of see you for who you are and
I think
where you're going to go.
I think he was confused, Patrick.
But don't you think he had that presence of mind to kind of, that you were giving up something to have this, to go for this, that little extra something that somebody has?
I think that was his belief, and I think he would have been right if basically I hadn't been sacked. I think, the combination of the situation is something that career-wise I think has been super useful and continues to be super useful. Situations will develop, and those situations can be an advantage or a disadvantage. And the fact that I'd been sacked, and the fact that my knee-jerk reaction was to go and do, or to try and do what I wanted to do, and he saw that as me giving something up, whereas the fact I hadn't. I wasn't there to tell him that, well, actually, you're wrong, and I was sacked, and you shouldn't give me a place. So, there's a lot of fate involved, I think, in what we do, particularly in documentary photography. Access can be presented in the strangest ways. And I think that was one of those situations. But I took the photography course and started almost straight away. And I remember I had to go and rent accommodation. I was given a full grant to do the photography course because I had no money whatsoever. And I can remember walking down to my first day at college and just thinking, I cannot believe this. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And I literally thought that. And I literally thought, how lucky am I? I'm going to walk down this particular road for probably the rest of my life when everybody else is walking in the opposite direction to the jobs I've given up, to banks and office work. And this is going to be my work. And I was just ecstatically happy. I had an enormous camera bag, with heavy cameras in it. And I used to walk, a couple of miles every day to go to college with this bag. It just didn't bother me. I just knew that I was so hungry for the opportunity and also the ability to understand how technically I could achieve what I wanted to achieve. That, that period just passed by so quickly. was phenomenal. It's phenomenal privilege. And I did nothing else for, I think 2 years, I think basically. The course was supposed to be longer than 2 years, but after 2 years, I was offered a job as a full-time sports photographer. And I went and saw my lecturer and said, look, I've been offered this, but it means I'm not going to complete the college course. And he said, what do you want at the end of the college course? And I said, well, I'd like this job. I said, well, I suggest you leave it. So I left.
You know, what's fascinating is you presented a visual that I feel is a life lesson. And it's something that I'm going to reflect on and think about often. But you were talking about a couple of miles that you were walking and carrying a heavy bag, and I'm kind of thinking of a big picture. And there's a lot of us that carry a lot of baggage, and it's really heavy, you know, when you're not inspired. But when 100%. You are inspired, it's very, very light. 100%, and 100%. It's so interesting. It's just I've been grappling with something like that, and you just said it in such a practical way, and it actually happened that way, and I think it's absolutely amazing. And so tell me a little bit about your journey there. So you went to Kent College, or what school was that again?
It was Kent Institute of Art and Design. So it was Medway College of Art and Design. It was called at the time. So yeah, it was a course in advertising and editorial documentary photography. And that, you know, that carrying that, interesting with that carrying that bag, and you're right, your observation of that. I also, there were many days I didn't need to carry the bag, and yet I thought, well, I should carry the bag, because if I'm carrying the bag, I'm always going to have to carry the bag. So why don't I learn to carry the bag? So it was, you know, again, this is me. It's almost like let's, you know, beat oneself over the back with a thorny branch, because it'll make us stronger when we get to the other side. So there was definitely that. There was definitely, you know, okay, if I carry this every day, then when I do have to carry it properly, because I knew what I was going to do, then I'll be able to do it. So there was, you know, you're 100%. There was part of that. There was part of this. It's so much easier to carry it if you don't find it a burden. But there was also, let's give ourselves a little bit more weight so that it's even less of a burden, and we can be prepared for what we're going to do for the rest of our life. And there was no, you know, this is not a comfortable line to, you know, I hardly ever talk about this, and I don't very often think about it. This is exactly what I did. But there was a out-of-body satisfaction with knowing that I had just given up what I viewed as mundanity and normality to do something that made me smile every day, and still does. So I was ecstatic. It was an extraordinary opportunity. I was not going to fail.
Right now.
Yeah. So he was right. He was right. The lecturer was right. All credibility to it.
What a great story. And what you're saying there is really inspiring, and so many people need to hear it. And I had one of those moments. And but the thing is that those roads are so foreign to the people that are around you, and they often put you at conflict with the people around you, and they all want you to take the safe road. And why did you give up on that career, and so on? And I actually experienced a transition that wasn't by my choice, and I found myself making a decision that was very radical in the wake of it, and choosing to go in a direction very much like you did. And you know, the people around me were looking at me like, why did you give that up? What are you doing? And but seeing you walk with inspiration and conviction is really, really inspiring. And but it's funny, you say there's a fated quality to it. So do you feel like there is a kind of destiny? There is some kind of fate? You know, when I think about your journey, you had that great newspaper that gave you the opportunity when you were young. You also got kicked out of that job after 3 months, and looking at you and telling you that I don't think you know why you're here. It's almost like life was closing the door on purpose for you, and so it almost feels like destiny for you. Do you feel like it's kind of ordained, this path is for you?
I mean, if I was looking for a job in a sort of the ecclesiastical world, I might say it was ordained, but I wasn't. I was in reality, I was probably a bored. If I think about it now, slightly autistic, slightly uncomfortable child, and I think that if we talk, and I'm sure we will, about influences, I didn't have a pile of books sitting at home, and I was paging through the world's greatest photographers. I felt that this gave me access to other people's worlds and lives, and I was, and always have been, and still am, intensely interested in those worlds. And that crosses over into so many different forms and formats, whether it be personal relationships, whether it be bodies of work. There was a body of work that I did recently for Geo magazine, which was the life and times of a gamekeeper, which for me was a very, very, I was going to say, a cerebral body of work, but it was a very, very important body of work and a very, very important time in my life. Just, simply because here was an individual, it was a family rather than an individual, who opened their lives because I asked them to. Now, that happens now probably because I have a provenance, so it's very easy to look and see who this person is. Is this person somebody we should trust? The decisions can be made quickly on that basis, but they're not often. It's also then the physical. I flew and drove to meet this family because I knew what they wanted to do, and I thought that was important. So, again, we go back to that, going and spending time in a meat market when you're 10, 11 years old. It's to be able to have the confidence and the conviction, and people to see that you actually do mean what you're saying, and it's not some voyeuristic short-term approach, but that you will give as much time and, in most cases, change your life in order to understand what their life is about. So that's super key for me. There's this terminology that somebody used years ago for me, which was, it's okay for you, you just parachute in. And that for me was probably one of the most devastating things somebody's ever said. So I'm overcompensating, as I did with the meat market, as I probably did with carrying the heavy bag, to such a degree that I will no longer I didn't, but I will not parachute into any story that I do. There's a long-term commitment, and that long-term commitment, I think, is vitally important when you work on the projects that I work on, because people are giving you access to their lives and an insight into their lives. And, in Gary's case, the Gamekeeper's life, the request from me was, I want to spend a year with you. I want to understand what your issues are, what your stresses are, what your happiness is, what affects you, what makes your life so difficult, because you're a fourth generation gamekeeper on a landscape that's we need to maintain. And without your presence on this landscape, it will not, it's impossible to maintain it. So I care, Gary. So give me access and I will give you an audience who will understand more about what you're at. Now, that audience only comes after years of doing what I do. So that's the provenance, the confidence and the ability to be able to say what you want visually comes through experience and technical know-how, I guess. So if I'm breaking it all down, and then there's an honesty there as well, that, I'm not going to fuck you over. I'm not going to come into this and then go back to my day job. This is my life. And as part of that was Leanne, his wife, had their second son. Now that was very important because, how is that son delivered? Is that son delivered through funding from National Health? Can he afford private? He's in the middle of nowhere. Where's that child going to be educated? So all those questions come up. But, what's the most visceral way to demonstrate the arrival of his son, the heir to that particular world, other than him physically delivering it with the same hands that slaughter wildlife on a regular basis and remove deer from within shot animals at the same time as giving birth to his son. So there's so many. For me, there was going to be so many visual references. These are the hands that bring life and the hands that also take life, but they're also the hands that maintain life, and they're hands that we have to rely on. So in order to do that, they had to allow me to document the birth of their child, which they did.
It's a fascinating story, and I love the tension there between the two concepts. It's taking life and giving life, and some of my favorite work has that beautiful tension that creates a nuance that I really, really enjoy. And I'm a big fan of anything that acknowledges nuance, and I love how you're able to see it and lean into it, and you tell stories with it. But you had referenced a little earlier that you had some kind of influences we'll get a chance to kind of talk about on this. This is that opportunity. And I know you were talking a little bit about Attenborough. Is it Attenbury? Or let me say it. What was it right?
Yeah, Attenborough, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I listened to him and I just love that voice. But then you have I'm kind of curious a little bit about your artistic influences, any photographers that you might follow, or anybody that, or maybe even a book that inspires you and it kind of gets you going. But I'm also kind of curious if there's anybody out there that you're just like, yeah, that guy's got it. So do you understand what I'm asking here?
I do. And, I'm not looking at work as a reference to how did somebody do that, or that's to say I'm not in awe of work is not true, because I am, but I'm in awe of the way that particular body of work, or that particular story, or that particular message has been produced and has been curated to produce that particular body of work. Natchway, I'm sure you're aware of. His work is, for me, is just I can spend days looking at his work, and not for any other reason other than the grace and the religious significance, the power to a lot of his imagery. And yet, given that I have some knowledge of that environment, the milliseconds that he has to be able to produce an image that I have the ability and the opportunity to spend days looking at, and it's impossible to pull it apart. Not that I would ever want to. For me, is completely extraordinary. And I think, if you talk to James, his personality is exactly in equilibrium with the results that he produces. So somebody else, that I would look at more within my particular genre, if you like, would be Peter Beard. In Peter's work, Peter had the opportunity and showed that with End of the Game to connect with an audience who would not normally connect with his subject matter, largely because of his personality and his looks and his society. But he had the ability to be able to draw those individuals in, and yet he had the creative and the visual literacy to be able to put that together as a body of work that drew in and changed people's opinion and changed policy on conservation in Africa. So I think we're always, as documentary photographers, using our particular skill set, our particular tick, our particular disadvantage, if you like, as an advantage. So the work I look at, is often based around an extraordinary individual, Tom Stoddard, for instance, another conflict photographer. Extraordinary work. These are wonderful bodies of work by people, I think, who just, the work is infused with their personalities. The lecturer we had at college was Terence Donovan. Terence Donovan was, for me, one of the finest, still is, although he passed away, one of the finest fashion photographers of them, I guess, 60s, 70s, 80s. I'm not even quite sure what he would class his particular peak at. But he was a black and white fashion photographer teaching me as a student when I was 17, 18, 19 years old. And he had a phenomenal body of work behind him. And he was just incredibly driven. I remember his desire to, I would shoot mostly weekends and every weekend, but mostly weekends and sometimes in the week. And I would see him the following week and he would look through work that he really it wasn't his subject matter, but he could see what I wanted to do and he could see where I was going and he could see a comparison there. And he was, phenomenally supportive. So a huge influence. And I still look back through his work. He wasn't as well recognized, I don't think, as he should have been, because it was the Bailey Donovan era, and I think Bailey had a much higher profile and a much better way of, if you like, marketing himself. And Donovan, I think, felt very unappreciated. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but his departure was very premature, and I don't think. I think if he'd have got an audience, I think he's very celebrated now, which grates slightly with me, because I think it's very easy for great photographers not to tick the right boxes at the right time, and other photographers who are not particularly gifted in my mind, not gifted at all, have the right marketing tools to be able to produce what they feel are credible bodies of work, and other people get onto that bandwagon, and I don't think they give the right message. So my influences are those really who I think have solidly produced and continue to produce bodies of work that are phenomenal.
I think what you just said there and what stood out to me about what it is that you were saying, it is what you notice about a body of work. It's like you can see the individual and you can also feel the perspective, which is something that I find really intriguing. And it's something I think I noticed too. But you weren't necessarily pointing to a subject or a concept. You were literally just kind of really appreciating the story and interested in how the stories were told and interested in a different perspective, and I really like that. And your in-depth view on that is really, really interesting. And I love how you're not necessarily looking for a style but you're kind of looking at an approach. And so that's kind of fascinating. So that leads me into you. So talk to me a little bit about that. And let's talk about some of the work that you've done. And you had referenced some interesting feedback in that whole in that Gamekeeper project. I think it's called the Gamekeeper, right?
Gamekeeper's
okay,
Gamekeeper's Life. Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about that. And your approach, I think, is really, really interesting. So talk to us a little bit about that approach. And there was some feedback. Well, you were referencing some kind of ideas. You don't want to feel like you want to just parachute in and, then disappear. You have a ton of respect for the subject and what it is that you're covering. And so this might be a great opportunity to go ahead and dive into your world and see your work and take a look at that. So let's dive into that, and maybe we can look at Gamekeeper or maybe even hunters, and I'll let you kind of decide how you do that. So do you want to go ahead and share the screen and talk about your approach and look at your work?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it should be sharing now. Can you see it now?
Yeah. Let's take a look at it.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's, what's interesting for me is that everything we've talked about up till now is largely not on this site, and it's not work that I necessarily show. So it's the progress to get there. Again, yeah, there is, there's a great sort of introspective view on I think work. And for me, there is no difference between work and life. There's no difference. So this is my life and this is my work, and I'm documenting my life. So that takes us back to that, walking with the bag is, sorry, I'll stop skipping through these. It will probably make people seasick. So
thank you.
so basically, I think if there's something that I don't understand, then I'll photograph it. Because it's a way for me, as I described with James's work, it's a way for me to spend more time looking at it and trying to work out where it went, where it went wrong, where it's going, how it happens. So, but in order to get to this, I had to go through everything else. So, college, sports photographer, traveled the world for 2 or 3 years, photographing all of the major sporting events, salaried, extraordinary, long lenses, everything, 3, 5, 6, 8, every lens that was out at the time, all manual focus. So it was all, thumbs and fingers and manual exposure, manual focus, many, many nights of freezing cold, soccer matches. It was an amazing training for both timing and position, and in those days, remote technology, cameras under horse jumps at the Grand National, etc. initially shot E6, so exposure was pretty crucial. And then latterly C41. And I did that for about 3 years, and then I found, actually at Wimbledon, which is, I think, has started today or yesterday. And I found myself going to Wimbledon to work at centre court and walking into Wimbledon and thinking, not Wimbledon again. And I just thought, if you're thinking this now and you've done this for 3 years, you might as well work in a bank, because this is not what you should be doing. You can do this now. So you should be doing what you want to do and what you think is important, your stories, not spending your life watching other people live their lives, but not actually having any control over that. So you're on the side of a court with a long lens, and then you go home and you come back and you do the same thing again. What happens to that tennis player when that tennis player is not on centre court? Surely that's more interesting than sitting with all these other people. So I left and I went freelance, and I started to then look at other stories that would allow me to get behind the scenes of that type of work. Now, there's other work I did during that period. I don't think anyone's not aware of the fact that there was a lot of other people that I worked with, but I was, the whole time that I was moving in the direction of working on my own stories, it was trying to find out where my direction was, where my strength lied, if you like. And it was very much finding stories, and also, which I increasingly do now, finding the emotional zenith, if you like, for where I particularly want to go. What means a lot to me? What do I care about? Do I care about who wins Wimbledon? No, I don't. Do I care about an elephant that somebody decides to hunt and why they think it's right to do that? Yeah, I do care about that. So then that's what I should be looking at. Do I care about injustice? Do I care about things that I can change? Then yeah, because now I've gone through that process. I now have the tools and I have the ability to be really finely tuned and really shaped in the charge that I put down in a particular landscape. I can shape it. So I now know when I set it off, what damage is it going to do? Is it going to destroy the building that I put it in, or is it going to destroy the entire landscape? Or is it going to destroy an individual? So can I do it in such a way that it focuses my audience on a particular subject? And if I'm going to do that, then I've got to be pretty fucking sure that I know what I'm doing and that I'm right and I'm well read. And now more than ever with social media, we have to know what we're doing. We have to be answerable. National Geographic, or I don't know what their following is now, but 284 million people, around that figure. When you publish something on a National Geographic Instagram feed or any of your social media feeds, you have to be 100% sure that you know what you're talking about. And you have to have the strength and the ability, going back to the meat market all those years ago, to be able to stand toe-to-toe with somebody and tell them why you think it's important you do that body of work. And although that's your opinion, it is your opinion, and you have the right to express that opinion, and you have the opportunity to express it in a way that you've now opened up a dialogue with them, because it's from a creative standpoint. So I think probably one of the bodies of work that affected me most and moved me, and it probably should be on here, but it isn't, and moved me in a particular direction. And I'd always wanted to look at wildlife, but I couldn't find a way to look at wildlife as a wildlife photographer, because I'm not a wildlife photographer, and I might just well sit on the edge of a tennis court if I'm going to shoot wildlife. It's not what I wanted to do. So in 2000, around 2000, I took on a commission from the British and South African Red Cross to look at HIV in South Africa. Currently, at that particular time, I think there was a 42% rate of HIV positive in South Africa. And I'd learned and spent a lot of time looking at this outside of starting the body of work, and realized that the South African government were not giving access to antiretrovirals at the time. When they did give access to antiretrovirals, you could produce a phenomenal change in people's ability to live a normal life. So it was just a case of getting the government to give access to antiretrovirals, something that they could do, but something that they didn't do. So with the South African British Red Cross, we produced a body of work called Living Positive, which photographed a whole load of African people in not a particularly interesting way, just going about their lives. And we exhibited them. And we exhibited them in Cape Town. And we also photographed people who, that group had access to antiretrovirals and were all HIV positive, but you'd never have known. And the portraits were shot in such a way that they would be your very stereotypical happy African people. And then we also found those who were not having access to antiretrovirals, and therefore their CD4 count was so low that they were barely alive. And we photographed them. And we built, in a gallery in Cape Town, we built an exhibition, and we built a shack where most of these people lived, away from the glitz and the glamour that people saw when they arrived in Cape Town or Joburg. And to get into the gallery, you had to walk through someone's house, a shack, with just a flat bed, where they spent their entire lives. When you went left, you would come across a whole load of big, smiley, happy people, and you'd walk around the gallery, and you'd have a description of the people's lives with the text panels. You get to the end of it, and the hope was you just kind of go, okay, yeah, that's nice, happy African people. And the point is, at the other end of the exhibition, you would have the same people prior to antiretrovirals and their life story, which was horrific.
Wow.
And the idea was, let me just finish. The idea was that what you would do, hopefully, is you would produce such a groundswell of opinion through tourism and through local people that the South African government would largely be embarrassed, but definitely be much more aware that with the world looking on, if you gave access to antiretrovirals, you could change people's lives and you could preserve people's lives, and that's all you had to do. There was a guy called Zaki Ahmed, who was an activist at the time, who also was tremendous at going down this particular route. And about a year later, the South African government changed policy and now give access to antiretrovirals. And I don't know what the rate is now, but people's lives were changed in a very, very dramatic and connected way. And I think that made me kind of interestingly, actually, because at the same time as I was doing that, because it was such a traumatic body of work, when we weren't shooting, and at the time I was shooting that with my wife, with Lisa. We're now separated, and she features in Handle Like Eggs. And we used to go into the townships every single day for months to photograph these individuals. And I had a very different view on the way I saw a place in the townships to Lisa's. Lisa smiles first and would ask questions later. With the background that I'd had and with the work that I'd done in various parts of the world, I was always slightly uneasy and slightly nervous. So, and also slightly combative, probably, defensive. She never was. So it was interesting for me to also watch her and watch the reaction that people had towards her, which definitely changed the body of work. Definitely changed the body of work. And when we had time off, we would start to go and see and look at wildlife because we needed to just get away from what was a pressure cooker. So we started to get involved with going and seeing more and more wildlife within South Africa. And it was then that I started to ask questions of what was happening within South Africa. And this is where it all started. So it's worth mentioning it, I think. Mm-hmm. So sorry to interrupt, but
no worries.
Because what we did was we went to a couple of places where, you know, we'd be on game vehicles going and seeing wildlife. And it was just chatting. And I said to one guy, I remember saying to one guy, so how many elephants do you have go through here? Because this is amazing. He said, we have 16. I said, okay, that's quite an accurate number. And he said, yeah. I said, okay, you don't get like 17 or like 15. He said, no, it's 16. I said, okay. Is it always 16? He said, yeah, it's always 16. It's never more than 16. I said, okay. Sorry, why is it 16? And he said, well, it's the carrying capacity of the landscape. I said, how? Sorry, how do you mean the carrying capacity? I said, well, if we have more than 16, we can't support them on this ecosystem. Just look at, well, can't they move to another ecosystem? He said, no, it's fenced. I said, no, it's fenced. It was a national park. He said, it's a national park, but it's fenced. He said, okay, so what happens if you get baby elephants? He said, we don't get baby elephants. Why do you get baby elephants? Because we use contraception. I'm sorry. You contracept the elephants. Yeah. And if we don't contracept the elephants, what happens then? He said, well, then when the elephants breed, we'll then sell the elephants. He said, we'll move them to another national park. So, okay, I had no idea this went on. So I expanded that. And then obviously I looked at the fact that outside of national parks, if you're in game reserves that are managed, which South Africa does, if you go over your population, you can also commodify. You can commodify by hunting. So you can make money from killing wildlife. So then you start to ask the question, which is where the National Geographic story came a few years later, is should we kill animals to preserve them? And in some cases, the answer is it's probably your best way to do it. Because what you learn very quickly, and what I'm now working on, is it's a very direct statement, and it can obviously be pulled apart, and there are exceptions. It's not about the wildlife; it's about the ecosystem. If we lose the ecosystem, we cannot reinstate populations of wildlife that have been eradicated by our own presence, by us, by disease, by whatever. You have to preserve the ecosystem. If you want to reintroduce wildlife, you need a pristine ecosystem.
Interesting.
If you have a pristine ecosystem and you want to keep human populations from it, and you don't want wildlife to eat its own ecosystem to destruction, which is what Peter Beard demonstrated in End of the Game in Savo, then you can commodify the wildlife. So somewhere like Nine, which is a body of work I did with National Geographic, or somewhere like Zimbabwe, which takes us to Elephant Story, is the commodification of elephants in order to protect ecosystems. So you're killing an elephant to give meat to the local population and money for education to the local population, and the hunter is the one who's paying for that. That can work. But we shouldn't be in that situation where we have to do that. But in some situations, it can work. So Elephant Story was an opportunity to produce a body of work that basically says, we are at a point now where this is our best option. We should not be at that point. But we are at that point. So you need to understand we're at that point. So next time you walk into a supermarket, you're not going to buy elephant meat, obviously. But you need to know where your meat comes from, because you need to know how it's sourced. Because if we don't care about where our food sources come from, then we're fucked. That's Elephant Story. And that's where this entire process, from walking with a bag over your shoulder to now where the work goes, is progressing. So now I'm talking to you from Saudi Arabia because I'm working in Saudi Arabia looking at ecosystems that have also been destroyed, but the potential to rebuild ecosystems and reintroduce wildlife, providing you have the income to be able to do it. So can we actually recover a broken ecosystem? And can we also recover the wildlife? And Saudi Arabia is currently one of the finest examples of an attempt and a success to some degrees to do that. So that's now why I'm in Saudi Arabia. So it's a parabola, it's a progression to this point from here. I've gone this way around on this.
No, that's amazing. I have a question about ecosystems really quickly. And maybe I'm just a little naive in this because of my art background, but when you talk about a closed ecosystem, you're talking about one that's closed, that's fenced in versus.
But it doesn't have to. But it doesn't have to be fenced in. Sri Lanka presents us with a closed ecosystem because it's an island.
Gotcha. Well, that makes sense. So this is where managing an ecosystem comes into play, and you found that quite interesting. Partly to the fact is you found a closed ecosystem in a national park, which got you thinking about managing numbers and the complex nature of hunting. And what other things and other questions were you exploring? Because when I'm listening to you and I'm hearing this internal dialogue that you have, which is quite fascinating. And I hear you engaging with it, and you have this very interpersonal relationship that is really unique. And I'm very curious about that, because I'm thinking about you at Wimbledon. There's so many people that would be just like blown away and at the opportunity that they got the chance to do it and that you did. But you have this internal dialogue that says, you know, if you're not enjoying this, then you might as well just be working at the bank. But now you're engaging these questions that are quite fascinating, and you decided to go freelance, and you're asking questions of yourself. And I think it's amazing. How did you get to that point to where you were trusting your internal dialogue and engaging with it, you know? But once you answer that question, what questions are you asking? Are you asking yourself that is driving you to express it through photography? Because to me, the root of this journey is this is the root of the journey that you're on right now, which is
you're spot on, which is why I guess I preamble around so much of this to get to this point, because there is 100% an internal dialogue there, but there is also a desire to utilize what experience we have. And I think as a photographer, and certainly as a documentary photographer, you have the ability to get access and to understand subjects on such a, as I said, such a shaped way, such a focused way, that we have, if we speak well, and I don't particularly, I listen to others speak, but I do have, I think, the ability to, as you said, to internalize what I see and then head off in a particular direction. And if you have the ability to present that visually, then I think it can be so focused, it can be so sharp that you are putting it straight into, particularly now with social media, you're putting it straight into someone's head without them having to sit down and read it or break it down or listen to it or have the time to sit and listen to a podcast like this. With the right image shot in the right way, and to be able to produce it in and I don't know whether this is answering your question, but to be able to produce it in such a complex way, you can just draw people in and then have the conversation. And I think we are so much more visually literate now because of social media, but we're also blind because of it. The imagery that's captured, and I think film still has a big part to play in this, because there is a difference between film and digital, and I don't know why, but there is. It's most definitely more tactile. It definitely, maybe it has a broader color palette. I don't know, but
that's what they say.
But it definitely, it definitely does. It has something, and I can tell when people shoot film. People can tell that I shoot film. I think the medium formats cameras now that this is my Rottweiler mentality, that I fight to use, because they are clunky and slow, and they're not, they're single frames, but it's as near as I can get to work in remote landscapes as if I'm shooting film. And I think now the way I shoot on them, I can still get the same message from the camera as I can from film, nearly as I can from film, which is great. So I don't know whether that answers your question, but there is most definitely a constant conversation, a constant questioning. There is in everything I do, because I want to understand. I want to understand what effect I have on another person, what effect my photography has on another person. This happens within my relationships. I will not question my relationships to such a degree that it becomes unpleasant. But I want to know. I want to know what you actually think, and I want to know, if I do something, how does that affect you? How do you feel about what I've just done? It's important to me.
I think what's interesting is the union between the photographic expression of the answers that you are finding, and that you're able to translate discoveries into an image and capture a feeling and an emotion that you are discovering in the process. I think you answered the second part of the question, but I guess the first part is, how did you cultivate that internal dialogue? How did you cultivate that? Like, how did you start to trust that? Like, and did it come after a long time, or was it something that you just inherently do? Because I can tell you so many examples of people that do not trust those questions.
That's such a good question.
I started this podcast. I started this podcast because I had a question, and I didn't want to start a podcast unless I had an actual question, that something I needed answers to. And I think that's what you are doing and with your photography. And I'm curious how you do that. Like, where did that come from?
You know where I think I've never been asked that before. That is so interesting. And my immediate answer would be, where I think it came from. It's come from the years of experience. Experience is such a bad word, but it comes from the years of documenting my life. in all its sport. I don't consider the sport work I did as not documenting my life. Of course it was. It was still living my life. So, and I think a fire station open day at 11, 12 years old, then seeing it on the front page of a newspaper, for me, it would be, okay, I got that right. And then I think, the perfect tennis ball embedded into a tennis racket on center court. That's the message. I've got that right. That's it. I've got it right. But then when it becomes more nuanced, and you then the image, or I don't know whether we're sharing the screen still, but like the image of this image, the image of Elephant Story. I knew when that happened that I got that right. I knew that the flights, the negotiations, the miles of walking, I knew that was my message. There was my message. So I think because your visual literacy, I'm shying away from saying mine because I think we all do it as photographers. I think your visual literacy becomes so defined, so refined that when somebody will say, "What's your best picture ever?" It's such a lame picture, a lame question. But you do know when you're editing, and you can look through that's the best frame. In the school, in the holidays when I was at college, and we broke up, and we'd have 6 weeks off. I literally went, what the fuck am I going to do for 6 weeks? I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to find somebody who I admire photographically, and I'm going to go and ask them if I can assist them.
Yeah, I did that
That's
too.
exactly what I did. Day one of school finishing, I went round to a guy who was a professional sports photographer and said to him, this is me and I'd like to assist you. And he said, well, I don't need anybody. I said, well, I've got 6 weeks. I don't need paying, but I want to assist you. Anyway, I just, it's fine. I'm good. I said, you don't understand. I will assist you in any way you want. And he said, okay. Okay, well, I'll tell you what you can do for me then, because it's I hate doing it. So, okay. He said, you can cut all of my slide film, E6, all of my slide film, and mount it in card mounts and stamp the card mounts with the company name. And it was Action Images at the time, with the company name. He said, and that's the best I can offer you. Now, what does that give me? That gave me every single frame he shot for 6 weeks. I looked at every single frame, and I cut and mounted every single frame. By the end of the 6 weeks, I could pick his best frame like that. I knew what was his best frame, and he would then choose his best frame. I was always right. It was always because I was understanding what he was doing. It also gave me the diary of his day, the diary of his life. So I'm here. If his girlfriend was naked in the morning, she would appear on the front of the roll. Then he would be at the football match. Then he would be photographing. And then he would be home in the evening, and he'd put his camera down. If the camera frame fired a frame accidentally, it would be an out of focus picture of his kitchen. That would be it. And then I would get that roll of film the next morning, and I would be able to see his entire day. So it gave me that visual literacy. Now, working with somebody like Kathy Moran, who was my editor at National Geographic, she has exactly the same way of reading images as I do. And it is the most intense thing to sit with somebody. It is beyond a sexual experience. But to sit with somebody and then go, it's this frame, then you go, yeah, yep. And then you go, it's that frame, and they go, yep. Out of millions of pictures, you are suddenly speaking exactly the same language that no one else speaks. It's your language. No one else speaks it. But you're taking out everything that stops people speaking that language, and you're giving them one word, one frame, that frame, elephant story. That is an alphabet compressed into one single frame. You present that to an audience who does not have visual literacy, and they'll get it. Present it to one who does have visual literacy, and they'll get it on steroids. We now have a world in which people have visual literacy, but it's dumb. It's dumbed down because there's so much of it. So now you're trying to produce, or I want to produce, I am producing, hopefully, images that makes people do exactly what National Geographic says, is when you're going through it, they don't go, oh, they go, oh, hang on. That second look, and that second look that says, okay, let me read this. And then if you can write as well, and now I've lost all inhibition as far as writing is concerned. So now I write. So now not only is my work, my imagery coming straight out of my head and my soul, but so are my words. So now I'm just like, what am I going to do? I'm going to be polite. I'm going to be, I'm going to write in a way that I should write. It's all a diary now. So everything I do now, there are no limitations to what I do. So I just write. I document and I write. And I put it together in such a way that it means something to me. And now I believe that if it means something to me because it's so honed down, then I have a voice, that it can go out. So it would take me a long time to do things because it's important. So I have work that I've shot, work from here, from Saudi, that I shot a long time ago, that I will go back through and I'll look at, and I'll remember the situation, or I've taken notes about the situation, and I'll know the significance about the number of leopards that they've managed, the Arabian leopards that they've managed to breed here, to introduce. It's mind-numbing. It's brilliant. So to be able to understand how they're doing that and the backstory to that, and produce an image that has liquidized, compacted everything that's gone before into one single frame, because people don't have time to look at more than one single frame, unless you can get them to go, I want to know more. And that's the ultimate aim. But everything now is, I'm trying to liquidize into a single frame, the whole story, a single frame. So that's one example. Another example would be, I was looking at this, that would be this image. So many questions. It's a cheetah. It's a cheetah at a swimming pool. Keeping me in the corner of the frame is crucial, because you have to understand that this is a diary, and this is also a king cheetah, which has a gene that's inherently makes it very vulnerable, very it's predated by other cheetahs because it's a different type of cheetah. So you're asking lots of different things, yet you can see the fence posts. So it's a swimming pool. It's not a water hole. So it's amongst humans. So why is it amongst humans? So you want to know more. So you ask more questions. The images are getting you to ask more questions. Hunters with buck. Another example. I mean, this was the first of the hunting images that I really thought, okay, this now works, because you don't know what's going on. It's beautiful. It's constable-esque in the light. It's a beautiful girl. It's a young girl. Why has she got a buck over there? You don't immediately see the huge hole in its shoulder. Maybe if you don't know what you're talking about, you don't understand that is a hole in its shoulder. It's beautiful. It's gentle. Won the Taylor Wessing Portrait Prize. National Portrait Gallery, London. Huge audience. And it's now exposed to an audience when I put the text with it and you say that this is a young girl hunting her first animal in Africa. And that animal is a bontabuck. That was an extinct animal. It was only reintroduced because hunters wanted to hunt it. There's your story. There's your narrative. There's an audience that now goes, what the fuck? What? This is finding your voice. For me, this is what I want to do. This is how I want to do it. And if you use it in a way, this image, if you use it in a way that gets people to not only appreciate it from a visual point of view, but also to then understand more about what's going on, then you can engage with them, then they can care. This image can be used this way up, or it can be used the other way up. The other way up, it's even more interesting. So it has that duplicity. This is relocation of a black rhino from an area where it gets poached to an area where it doesn't get poached. Again, it's perfect. It's perfect for that. Otherwise, what am I going to do? I'm going to put something that people are going to want to turn away from. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does. And I love how clear you are. And I like how it's a quest to answer a question. And I'm just seeing a very interesting connection there, especially to the original question that I had there. But you had also said something that I thought was really interesting, which drives back to my initial question with the podcast, which was, you were talking about everyone has a visual language, but today it's kind of a dumb visual language. It's a kind of very simple way of interpreting images today, and I think that's kind of a strong word for it. But I find that the visual language that we're all starting from is very primitive. It's very primal. And it kind of goes to that very primal desires and that we have. With someone like you who has a ton of experience engaging the public with your own visual language, capturing these individual images that bury an entire story in there, has the introduction of social media changed the way you work, or has it influenced you in a way? Have you had to change your approach at all? I'm curious if you had to make it a little bit more, bombastic, fantastic, has it changed you or your approach?
No,
I'm curious.
No, I don't think it's changed my approach at all. I think what it's made me is even more responsible than I was previously,
okay.
because I've
heard that.
Because I think, I think you are directing this now. Best publication ever in National Geographic would not have got me 248 million people. So, now we have access to that type of audience. I think you have to be accountable. You have to be accountable to those you're including within the work, individuals, and also to the subject, if it's not an individual, that you're working on. So research, I think now for me it's a long process to make an Instagram post when it should probably just be not a long process. And that's probably a fault with me, and it's something that I would probably rather not have, because I think it inhibits me in some way. But I just think that my progression, and you were asking earlier about how you've got to this stage, how the internal voice has got to this stage. It's impossible to stop that internal voice now, and I don't want to. Therefore, in order to continue that internal voice, I have to answer a lot of the questions that it asks of me, and that is, yes, that can be an amazing frame. Yes, that could be perfect for Instagram, and it tells a story I want. Is it factually correct? Are my facts correct? Are the individuals happy for that to be used? And is the story something that people are going to care about? So, and can I present it in such a way? Is it a single image? Is it a reel? Is it a story? How do I present it on that particular platform? Is it split in two? Does it work split in three? Is it a pano? How does it? So, and these are all things, it can take me, once I decide what I'm going to do for a post, it can take me a solid day to put a post together. Now, that's having gone through the edit, gone through the words, gone through the text, which can take weeks. So once I've got to that physical stage, it's a single image and this is the text. It's how does it then lend itself to Instagram? I don't treat it as Insta. It's not, because the audience is too great for it to be Insta. Unless I want it to be vacuous or to be treated in, to be dumbed down in some way, which I don't. Because I think there's important messages to be told, and I think Instagram is a phenomenal tool with which to do that. So I'm not negative in any way, shape, or form about what Instagram and social media presents us. Presents us with an incredible opportunity, and the audience that I have on Instagram is not massive, but I engage with it, and I genuinely respect and like the people who follow me and engage with me on Instagram. We have a dialogue. And that's important to me because they have an opinion, and they are now an audience that I might have had in another more traditional way some years ago, who will come on and say, I think that's really interesting. Have you looked at? And I'll look at it. And if it's worth doing, I'll go and do it. So again, there's a dialogue there. So it's important to have that dialogue.
I can't escape the sense of responsibility that you have for the power of an image. And it reminds me of a conversation that I had very early on that kind of struck me. This photographer, Jessica Auer, and she was talking about, she's in Iceland, and she was reflecting on the power of tourism on the landscape and the power of an image. And she stopped me in my tracks because she said something about that she doesn't photograph certain areas because she doesn't want to post that to attract tourism, and she understands the responsibility of posting, and that just hit me. The presence of an image is something to think about, and understanding your presence as the author of that and the responsibility that comes along with that. And I can hear you grappling with that, and I think that is very thoughtful, and it's after a lot of these conversations, I get these little nuggets, and that stay with me. And I've got quite a few from you. So I knew I would, but man, you are really giving me some things to think about, and they're very, very powerful. So talk to me a little bit about hunters, and talk to me a little bit about that project.
It's lovely talking to you because you're again, as part of that whole process that we've talked about, you're making me think about a lot of different things, which is why I knew it would be interesting to talk to you, because both your work and Steve's work is super important. And Jessica's right. There are a lot of images that I have, which is why I was talking about that it may take me weeks, months to actually choose to post an image on Instagram, because I know the power of it. So, do I want to go down that particular route? So I'm not thinking at the first stage of posting the image. I'm thinking of those comments that are coming, or what is the result of me posting that? That's just good. You're going to get people who are going to go to a particular part of the world. I've just been to the most extraordinary part of the world, and I'm not going to post landscapes from that part of the world, because I don't want it to change. Do I have the right to do that? I have the right to do it because I'm going to do it. But do I have the right to say I'm going to go and spend the last 10, 12 years with the Samburu looking at their culture, but I don't think tourists should get the opportunity to arrive on game vehicles or whatever else and share that with them. Yeah, I do, because there's, it's that parachuting in again. Our work should not be voyeuristic. Our work should be, it should be documentary, and we should be sharing and empowering the lives of the people we work with and understanding them, not putting them out there for clickbait. So we have a responsibility. We always have had a responsibility. I can't remember who it was who said some years ago, and I'm going to paraphrase it as well. It's not going to be right, but with a camera becomes great responsibility. So treated with respect, all will be given. Treated with disrespect, and all will be taken. Something along those lines, and it's so true. I live in a country now.
When did that hit home for you? When did you just understand that clearly? Like, I'm just so curious. When did that just kind of click for you?
I think I can always remember it being there. But I mean, that would be illogical, because obviously, my work has not always been of that nature. God, that's such a good question. I mean, there have been various times where I can. Well, you're really getting me to dig deep. I think there are various times when I've remembered those particular situations. I'm thinking of the Grand National now with camera remotes under fences, and just because some of that imagery that you can capture in those situations is gruesome, and we have the ability, or certainly from a sports point of view, you have the ability to be able to capture something at such a great speed and from such a distance that just one of the reasons it didn't gel with me long term wise, and also why I then fiercely and continue fiercely to use the format of photography I do, is that I can't remove myself from the situation. So even with wildlife, I shoot the animals I shoot. If you're shooting a medium format, a Mamiya 6.7 with a 63 millimeter or an 80 millimeter lens, you have presence.
Yeah.
And the same with hunters. All of those portraits with hunters, I wanted to go through the preamble to understand why those hunters were doing what they were doing, and then say to them, okay, I'd like to photograph you. But in order to do that, with some of these hunts, you'd have to live with them on the ground, as in sleeping on the ground or in a tent for 3 or 4 weeks. And these may be people you don't like doing things that you don't like, but that's the only way to do it. So I think that responsibility and that sort of, you shoot a horse coming over a fence on an incredibly long lens, and, you're not connected with the sheer impact and the sheer noise and the sheer aggression of that particular situation. So it makes the viewer believe it's a much more clinical, much less visceral event, I think. So maybe it's just always been there. Maybe it's been looking through, Duncan's images all those years ago on a light box. I mean, he was a magician on a long lens, and you would, every frame would be sharp of a football player on a cold day running towards you with a ball at its foot, and you could see them. The years of training that's gone in to produce the legs that would allow you to do that. But where's the training? So it was. I don't know. I don't know whether that answers your question. I don't know. I mean,
yeah, it does.
If you can tell.
Yeah, I think there are these moments that we have that we understand, like, wow, we're holding on to the power of something, and you humble. It was like you were humbled in the presence of it, and I guess that's what I'm hinting at. Maybe it happened to you in South Africa while you were doing that project.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But also, you want to talk about hunters. You see the image now on the screen now. You see, this is also where I just go, fuck you. Because this is this allows you to not have that. You still have the internal debate. And I think when you work in a situation like this, I think you then have, again, that sort of shaped charge that your camera and your photography allows you to have. There's nothing right about this. So there is no debate here. And occasionally, you do have the opportunity, or you do come across this type of situation. This guy is a hedge fund manager from the US. And I'd wanted to look at leopard hunting, because leopards are extraordinary creatures. And I'd heard that because hunters, I looked at individuals and species, and I'd heard that there was an organization that was training dogs. You can see the dogs in the left of the frame. It was training dogs in South Africa. And I went and trained with the dogs. And then the dogs were being taken over too. So this is the guy holding the leopard here, with a plaster on his forehead. This is him here. So this is part of the process. So he was trained. He's a worker working for a South African guy who was training hounds in South Africa to hunt leopards in Namibia. And they were training them on lynx. So this is a lynx. So in the off season, they would train. So I went and ran with them, worked with them for a few months, and produced this image of this guy. And then I went to Namibia with them. And Namibia had a thriving population of leopards at the time. And it's very difficult to hunt a leopard. The success rate is very small. But if you do it with dogs, and these dogs were extraordinary, then you can knock that percentage up to levels where it becomes unsustainable as far as the population of leopards is concerned. So I worked with this particular team of dogs and these particular individuals hunting leopards. And this was one of the leopards, and I wanted to try and find a way to show what was going on. And this guy was a very wealthy hedge fund manager from the US. I think he was a hedge fund manager. Anyways, from the US. And they baited a tree in Namibia and put a camera on the bait. And when the leopards went up to the bait, they then photographed the leopard and sent a picture of the leopard to his desk in the US. And he decided whether he wanted to shoot the leopard or not on the basis of that picture. And he flew over the next day and he shot the leopard and he left the next day. And this was a huge male leopard. And for me, I asked him why he felt that was what he wanted to do. And he said, why not? And I just thought, okay, I have nowhere to go with this. This needs to be an image that you can still unwrap it. You still don't see the dogs easily. You see the dogs behind. You see the dogs to the side. It's strong colonial influences. The way the workers are there, the body language. It's an enormous leopard. He was about 95 kgs. And the blood on his knee. So that, again, you read the image and you unravel the image. So there's a lot of thought went into this. I think there's other images, if you go into this section, that also talk about the hunt.
That's over 200 pounds for everyone out there that are in the pounds.
It's a huge leopard. And there were various other situations within that I don't know whether I've included in here. You see, this is another one. And so occasionally it was always about a portrait, because it had to be about a portrait. And the research I did before I did it was referencing 18th, 19th century hunting portraits. I looked at the work of Lancer. Was amazing artist, painter, and the way he depicted. I also used that reference for the Gamekeeper, for Gary's project, because he was mainly deer hunting, stags, English aristocracy, kings and queens. And, if you looked at the old hunting portraiture, they would be kings and queens with piles of lions. And I just thought, well, so who's doing this? And now it's not kings and queens. It's still some kings and queens, but it's mainly just people who want to do it. So then I looked at the psychology of why these individuals wanted to do it. And then some of the images I wanted really to demonstrate the futility. So this is the baiting of the leopard. This is the same guy. This is put this up the tree, and then the leopard goes up the tree. So in some cases I looked at the whole process. In other cases I didn't. And then this is a young boy who's just shot this buck. It's on his cell phone. So also the opportunity was really to father and son. This is a professional hunter I worked with. I worked with him for probably 3 or 4 years across numerous species, constantly in conflicts with his own emotions and his own reasons for doing what he was doing. He now doesn't hunt. He's now a head ranger on a reserve protecting wildlife. So many conversations with him. This is a child.
So did you...
Shooting the first animal.
I'm curious. There's this interesting phenomenon that happens, and forgive me for not knowing the exact term right now, but I'll remember it when I hear it. But a lot of time when you're captured by somebody, and you start to fall in love with the captor.
Syndrome.
Yes, Stockholm syndrome. Yes, thank you. Did you ever find a moment where, I know you had some preconceived notions about this. Did you find yourself at all connecting with these individuals and kind of finding some compassion for them?
On many, 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 many different levels. I mean, this guy was extraordinary. I mean, connecting with them in long-term relationships, Darnie, who's the guy that I was talking about earlier, most definitely. We did a lot of work together. And without the initial connections, without the initial one hunter basically saying to me, after years of research, years of approaching people, one hunter saying to me, yes, you can come and see what I do, because I believe you care about what I do, and it's not going to be another pictures because we're knocking. And I did care, and I still care. So I still work with some of these individuals, and I will continue to work with them because their story is interesting, and they are progressing through this particular situation in their own lives. So most definitely, this guy here is a trauma surgeon. Works in one of the most traumatic hospitals in the US, and spends a lot of his time doing saving people who have been in gangland shootings and stabbings. So stitching people back together, bringing them back to life after they've been, they've tried to kill each other. And he relaxes by hunting. And I found him on one particular day on his hands and knees in the carcass, inside the carcass of a giraffe, looking for the bullet, to trace the path of the bullet and examine what damage it had done and how it had brought an end to the life of this giraffe. Now, I would say he's probably PTSD, deeply traumatized by what he does work-wise. I don't know. But it's not the type of thing I would have thought you would have chosen to do in your downtime, given what your day job is. So you can't not look at the individuals and the questions. Father, son, and wife. Wife here on the right doesn't hunt. Father hunts, daughter's first hunt. She's hunting lions. So professional hunters left and right, and hunter in the center. So I looked at differences hunting elephants in Zimbabwe. So I looked at different individuals, different situations. She's a professional hunter, very well-known professional hunter, and then looked at the tangents of that. So it's always, me, it was always interesting to look at, or to try and find something within that body of work that also then gives, like this, for instance. This is a professional hunter's birthday party. So to bring things back to what they would consider to be the mundanity of what they do. They're your equivalent of getting to Wimbledon and going, not another year of Wimbledon. For a lot of these guys, what I was seeing as extraordinary, they were seeing as not another elephant. And I think when you start to then produce these bodies of work and you go back to them, which again is that don't parachute in, but you go back to them and you talk to them and you produce and you give the body of work and you say, so tell me about this. A lot of these, not a lot, but several of these guys don't hunt anymore. It's nothing to do with the body of work I've done. I strongly believe that. But it is due to the fact that they've had the opportunity to, over time, to just go, why am I doing this? I have a skill that would allow me to do something else. So why don't I do that? And again, it's your audience, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of hunters there. This is not me preaching. It's me finding where I am. And it's also other people finding where I am, because it's a dialogue. I'm not working for the Daily Mail and producing a body of work and make people go, let's shoot everybody. Any hunter should be killed, because that's not true. But we have to, if people are going to allow us to understand their lives, we have to give them the courtesy of understanding their lives.
So true.
And presenting it
true.
In a non-judgmental way. This is some of the Gamekeeper in a non-judgmental way. The Gamekeeper, I think we've talked about. I mean, there would be two images here. This would be one of those images where you just kind of go, what the fuck? So this is the ballroom at hunting lodge, which looks like somebody's turned a porcupine inside out.
It's just so surreal.
And then this is you're talking about people that you stay in touch with. This is wonderful, incredible man, Peter, who has been a gamekeeper managing these lands for some 65 years. And he is more in touch with landscape and environment than probably anyone I've ever met. Completely gentle, wonderful soul and spirit. And, when you look at the landscapes that he works in, let's try and find you something that gives you an idea of it is completely extraordinary. So these are his sort of the distances that this is a wild landscape. It's
amazing. It's gorgeous. Stunning.
Yeah. Now, what's our choice? You talked about fenced areas. What's our choice? Break up these huge estates, make them into small enclosed ecosystems where each one will have a different species on it, a different, or you have free roaming. But you have to generate income. You have to manage the land. And that's what he's done for 65 years. So yeah, extraordinary man. You have to look at his story.
I'm quite taken by your approach, and I'm kind of really intrigued by those internal questions that you ask yourself. And I do have one question, especially with those two bodies of work, is always try to find that nuance. Was there anything that challenged a preconception that you found interesting as you started asking questions of yourself? In particular,
I think
pointed to these two projects.
I think all of them. I mean, Saudi Arabia. I think I, from previous experience in the kingdom, I had preconceived notions of what I could expect, and I think what I'm seeing and what I'm documenting, I think is extraordinary, and I think it's, it gives us hope for what we can achieve in other landscapes globally. I really do. It requires wealth. It requires income. It requires an enormous amount of dedication. And Saudi Arabia has that. Other countries don't. But, if we're truly to preserve, conserve, and rewild and reinstate, then we need all those things, and we have to join together. We can't leave a isolated part of northern Kenya to deal with a small population of lions on a budget of $35,000. If we care, then we need to make that money available to those who can serve. Saudi Arabia is lucky enough that historically it's had that wealth. There will be questions. This is why it's such an interesting body of work, how that wealth has come about, what happens in the future. But the point is, they are doing something, and they are using those best qualified in order to do that. And we're all learning from it. So it's a super interesting project to work on.
And this is that project where you're looking at the restoration of ecosystems and what it takes to invest in that. Just to create that context, as far as, because we jumped from those hunters into this one. But I think it's absolutely fascinating, your journey, and your backstory and how you found your way into photography. And I think the one thing that I'm going to take away from this conversation is these burning questions that we have inside of us. These, they have a reason, and we have this extraordinary ability as photographers to photograph our answers and our discoveries. And you have gotten to a point to where you are able to translate that into a visual language that is uniquely yours. And I have to applaud you on that. It's amazing. And if you ever get a retrospective, which I'm sure you will, and I'm sure you have a lot more stories to tell, but that's going to be the thing we all clap for, It's like, wow, it's pretty amazing. And thank you. I just have one more question for you. It's the one I ask everybody at the end of the show. And I think I'm going to do a collection of all the answers that I get to this.
Why am I dreading this?
What? It's not that hard. But do you have any advice for anyone out there that is making their way as a photographer out there? Do you have any advice for anybody out there?
I can't think of a better thing to do. So I have no idea what I would have done Otherwise, I think you have to be, I think we talked about it earlier. I think there are costs, there are huge costs. But if you have this burning desire to do something, whatever it is, it doesn't have to be photography, then you should do it. I would say that, and this is going to sound a bit sort of twee, but this is not at the expense of hurting people or of losing yourself. But Handle Like Eggs is an example of the catastrophic costs of being very driven about what you do. So it's not an easy way to make a living, and if you do it, it's a life, not a living. Because I think photographers generally don't make a very good living, but we lead the life that we want to lead. And in my case, I get the opportunity to share other people's lives, and which I think is an extraordinary privilege. But the cost, the cost is there. The cost has to be there. You can't be absent in both mind and body to the degree that you need to be, or to the degree that I have been and continue to be over the years. And I've been lucky enough to have the most extraordinary people in my life, and still do have the most extraordinary people in my life. But sometimes they feel that it's better to be away, maybe from all of the introspection and the travel and the ups and downs and complexities and insecurities, and they're right.
Yeah, you pointed to the cost, and I have seen that up close in a lot of my interviews, and I'm thinking about 3 or 4 different people, and the cost on your relationships, your personal relationships, is, I think, very impactful. And I think you're talking about that same cost, and I'm probably going to have you on this show one day. I think we could have some deep, great other conversations, and I love to see what you're up to, But the other thing that really stood out to me was that wealth can be measured in many different ways, and one of those can be living the life exactly living the life that you want to live, and it's not just financial. And I think you did a beautiful job of expressing that. But this life that we choose to live that calls us, as you were, I don't know if I chose, but it does have a cost to it. And I think it's really, really important to consider.
It does.
And,
it does, Patrick. But it's also, I think what's interesting is that, a bit like social media, you very quickly filter out those people who are not prepared to go down that road. And if those people do go down that road, and you end up going, taking a different turning at some stage in your life, it doesn't make them any less significant, and it doesn't make them any less unique. So you get to filter out the vacuous very quickly, because you just don't have the patience. So all those people who are no longer in my life from that point of view are so important in my life. My son, my ex-wife, my current partner, are just creatively enormously important, but also emotionally. And I will still run work past all of them, life decisions past all of them, and relish the opportunities to spend time. But I don't do enough of it because I'm doing other stuff.
Yeah.
But they understand that, yeah.
There it is. Thank you so much for coming on.
There it is.
It was great.
It's lovely to talk to you. Thank you for the question.
Of course. So this is the opportunity to tell people how they can connect with you, share your website, and also your Instagram handle so they can follow you.
Yeah, my website is davidchancellor.com and my Instagram is Chancellor David.
There you go. It's just reverses just for the handle. So I am so grateful to have you on today, and I really appreciate having you on. And to all those that have made it this far, thank you so much for joining us on the Urbanaut Podcast. If you like content like this, please like, share, and comment down below. That all helps us with the algorithm and helps get us in front of new audiences. And if you want to support us in a little deeper way other than liking, sharing, and commenting, you can also join our Patreon and become a subscriber there. We are adding content there, and we have big plans for that place. So become a paid subscriber there and help support us in that way. And as always, we'll see you next time.